Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. This is episode number 69. We're fast approaching 70, which is wonderful. The Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast is brought to you by the Hare Krishna Project, which is a national initiative that seeks to try and, if it makes sense, share Krishna consciousness with a new audience. And our podcast, which has a big audience now. It's being watched by devotees, not just in Britain, even though it's Britain-based, British-based, but we're kind of watched and seen by devotees all over the world, which is fantastic. And as you know, we like to chat to devotees in the real world about real issues. And therefore, I'm pleased to welcome our guest this week. Our guest is Dee. Hare Krishna, Dee.
Hare Krishna, thank you for having me.
No worries. It's great to have you with us. And we've been kind of chatting online for a while. And I don't think it was difficult to persuade you. It was just, it took a while to work out a date when you were free. And your first response when I asked you if you'd come on the podcast was like, you don't feel qualified. And that's probably the top answer that a lot of devotees give. I don't feel qualified. You don't have to have a qualification in podcasting, I can assure you. So Dee, let's start with a nice easy one. Tell us a bit about you and where you're from.
Yeah, so I'm Dee. I live in London, and yeah, I was born in Sri Lanka, grew up in Yorkshire, now reside in London. So very much consider myself a Sri Lankan Yorkshire hybrid, so to speak. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. Day job, I work in the civil service, UK civil service. I've been a civil servant since about 2017 now. So yeah, that's a
Wow.
little bit about me in a
So
nutshell.
you were born in Sri Lanka. When did you move to Yorkshire?
So when I was about 14, 15.
14. Because your
So
accent's a bit mixed, isn't it?
yes, I think, yeah, it does. It does. I've been told I kind of switch between the two. So I think,
Actually, when you
yeah,
said the word told, it sounded a bit northern then. Told.
yes. Back in the day, I used to get told, probably not the most appropriate forum to mention this. I used to get, as the more drunk I was, the more northern I sounded. This was many moons ago. So,
Well, I'm from Somerset, which I've talked about quite a bit on this podcast.
okay.
And when I used to drink many years ago, I can't believe I'm talking about this on a Hare Krishna podcast. The more I drank, the more Somerset I sounded, because I was just so relaxed and just sound like
Yeah,
a.
I think that's a thing. That's a common thing. Yeah, when this was when I was at university, all my friends used to say, last night you sounded like a different person, halfway through the night.
Yeah, you become more relaxed.
But
You mentioned that you work in the civil service. Are you able to tell us a bit about that, if it's not kind of a big state secret, and what you do?
yeah, so I have a risk and project management background. So I've worked in few different departments. So, and actually, I consider it a bit of a privilege, really. Had the opportunity to work on very kind of key projects of like Brexit, COVID recovery for different departments, and I'm currently working on teacher recruitment and retention issues for the department. So I run major projects. So I lead major projects for government departments. So that's a little bit. I think the beauty of it is you get to see things that you implement that are tangible. So when I worked on COVID response, I led on the delivery of, I don't know whether COVID monitors, CO2 monitors, and air cleaning units for classrooms, which helped the teachers and schools to
Mm.
track how safe the air was. And that really helped the schools to stay open once we'd lifted certain restrictions. So things like that you get to do where you see the tangible difference being made to the public is something that I find enormously rewarding. So I really consider it a privilege.
So
To
you
be part
work
of it.
in as a civil servant in one particular government department.
Yes, I do at the moment, but I've worked in multiple departments.
Mm,
So
mm.
yeah.
And so I mean, I'm not sure what I can and can't say about you working in the civil service, because I have other friends that I think, particularly people that work for the MOD, that's a bit more secretive, isn't it? I have a friend who used to work
Yes,
for the MOD.
depends on the departments.
Yeah.
Yes, certain departments, because if it's national security related, I mean, I think there's also other areas, I probably can mention, I just mentioned Brexit because I did work on it, but I can't
Mm,
go into detail because it is, sort of implications on trade and,
mm.
sort of um, issues around very sensitive areas,
So
policy areas.
you've been a civil servant since 2017. What were you doing before that?
So I worked in the private sector. I worked in lobbying essentially. I was a stakeholder engagement company. And before that, I worked in Westminster in Parliament for a shadow education secretary. So that's kind of, and then I became quite interested in education policy. Then I worked in lobbying mainly in the sort of education policy area. Then I joined the Department for Education, which was my first civil service job. So, yeah, so
Mm,
I've
mm.
been around politics, policy sort of environments since graduating, really. Yeah.
So you moved from essentially what was a kind of political role to some extent. I mean, I mean, I've done the research on you, so I know what that persuasion was. And then you've moved to a kind of very politically neutral role. So just so people understand what I'm talking about, Dee worked for an MP in Parliament. Are we allowed to say which MP that was?
Yes, yes, it was the shadow education secretary. So people, the person on the opposition that led on the
Hmm.
education brief. So if the opposition were to be elected, they would become the current equivalent
Hmm.
of the education secretary.
Mm. So you worked for the opposition, which
Yeah.
is currently still the opposition, just so people
Yes.
understand, because not unless you've been working a lot longer than I imagine. And now you've moved to a politically neutral role in the civil service because you worked kind of for a politician, a high-profile politician, actually, I would say, relatively high
Mm.
profile. How did you have to go through lots of kind of vetting in terms of, or make a vow that you'd be neutral from now on?
I mean, there is a civil service code of conduct which requires you to be politically neutral, but I think it's also the sort of change in thinking. Because when I worked in the private sector for lobbying after I worked in Westminster, which is a sort of natural career progression for people in politics,
Mm,
I then got to get myself more familiarized with the wider thinking around education policy. So
mm.
that sparked an interest in policy and the actual, irrespective of where it came from, sort of thing. So it's sort of becoming a lot less partisan. So that helped me make my transition into the civil service easier. But it's just that obviously inherently everybody will have some sort of political inclinations, but
Mm,
it's just that you shouldn't let that dictate your
mm,
thinking when you
mm,
do the work is the sort of is where the whole impartiality comes into.
mm. I know of a few, I don't know many civil servants, but there's some that I do know are a lot older than us, and they're probably close to retirement age now. And they say one of the most difficult things is you spend years planning something or doing something, and then there's a change in government, and they come in and say, no, we want to do this now, we want to do that, and they just feel so kind of disappointed or frustrated because they
Mm.
have to start again. In one sense, we've had the same party in power for 13 years at the moment, so there probably have been some changes as prime ministers have changed, I'm sure, and members of
Yeah.
the cabinet, but ultimately there hasn't been drastic change in terms of ideology for a
Mm.
good 15 years, has there? Um,
Yes, and also I think the point about change, I mean, I like change because change is what I do. I'm a project manager, transformational change is my thing. So I like when people want to change things, or hopefully for the better, and then
mm,
it's also a large part of civil service is taking that policies into implementation and into deliverables. So the vast majority of my job is taking that, line in a white paper saying, we will do XYZ and transferring into implementable program. So that's
mm,
that's a lot of my current day-to-day job, translating policy into delivery in a
mm.
nutshell. So I quite like that.
Good. Good. Well, I don't want to get too political on this podcast, but
Yeah.
I think it's good that you like change, because there's I'm trying not to come off the fence here, but there might be a change in government next year, and if there is, that you're the ideal person to oversee change if you like change. Some people don't like change at all. I struggle. I like change, but I struggle with it in my because I think it's my star sign. I'm a Cancerian, so if I have a plan for the
Okay.
day and then that plan changes, I get really frustrated and very kind of like, I'm a bit OCD with timekeeping as well. Okay, we might come back to education later and education policy and working in the civil service. Let's talk a bit more now about Krishna consciousness. I'm keen to know how a girl from Sri Lanka that moved to Yorkshire took an interest in Krishna consciousness. How did that happen?
Very interesting story. I mean, we could be here until the cows come home if I went into all the details. But in a nutshell, I was not born and raised a Hare Krishna or in the Hindu or similar faith. So I was quite the opposite. I was actually raised a Buddhist. So I used to go to Sunday school until I was, until we kind of moved to the UK. And so I was very strongly brought up with the Buddhist values, the sort of atheist impersonalism in mind. So it's been quite an interesting journey for me trying to get into Krishna consciousness. So because it was just vastly different, the idea of creationism wasn't there. So it was a lot of things for me to comprehend. But one thing was Krishna was so persistent with me, I've got to admit. I openly admit this because I've met devotees. Krishna keep throwing devotees in front of me for a long,
Mm,
long time
mm,
in different destinations. So much so I'd go on holiday. I've been in Sweden, Netherlands, and I've bumped into Harinam parties. What's the chances? And every time I was in Oxford Street, I used to see Harinams or people doing Harinam just outside the tube station or anything. But I just thought, they were a bunch of buskers or, fundraising. So I genuinely didn't know what they were all about. And I was always curious. I wouldn't want to say I was just instant. Some people just see Harinam or devotees are and instantly attracted and attached, and that's the end of the story. But it took me honestly about 2.5 years to actually make a move. And it happened during a yoga festival. Kirtan London were doing their pop up, what I now know as the pop up temple. And they were just randomly handing over japamalas and said, "Oh, let's chant." And, I was just like, "Oh, chanting, what is this?" Like, I have no idea what this is. And yeah, and something in it resonated, and I got curious and started exploring. So, and, I'm still here.
mm,
So,
mm.
yeah.
So when was that out of interest? So you were in London, you were working in London, and then you kept seeing the devotees, and Kirtan London
This
were
was way
having them.
before I moved into
Okay,
London.
okay.
So, for years and years, and it was when I actually moved into London in 2017, around I think probably summer of 2018-ish, that I actually properly met devotees. And then actually, it was really during the lockdown. I used to do quite a bit of outreach
Mm,
for Soho Street during lockdown. There's sort of outreach Bhakti Yoga London programs and things, and that's where I really kind of dived into the philosophy and
mm.
started associating more with devotees, really. So before that, I was just a bit curious and dabbling in it here there.
Dabbling. We've all dabbled in something. And
Yeah.
what is it about Krishna consciousness that appeals to you? And in what sense, what is it in the philosophy that you find attractive that you personally didn't discover in Buddhism?
It was really the service attitude. And one thing I'd say is, I've seen that at least people really desperately trying, and I know none of us are perfect, but at least people, I've never seen a bunch of people desperately trying. Obviously, like I said, there's faults, and we're not perfect, faults, egos, and what have you, but I've never seen a bunch of people desperately start trying to serve so enthusiastically anywhere else. Because I went to a Church of England boarding school, and so I've dabbled in Christianity and
Mm,
Buddhism, but I've never seen that service attitude. And that's what made me think, I've been to temples, Buddhist temples, and it was all about, oh, who wants to be the, front person and, lead things. And, we couldn't find anybody to clean anything, do the supposed menial tasks. And whereas when I went to the first Sunday feast class, and I remember afterwards, everybody was just like, oh, I can help clean. I do you want me to do this? There was so much, everybody like desperately trying to do the little bit of service. And I remember me very enthusiastically volunteering to mop the floor. And I just really desperately wanted, because I saw how desperate everybody else was to serve. And that's what
Mm,
really made me think, actually these guys are a little bit different, because there's so much focus on me, myself, and I. With Buddhism, it's all about you dealing with your karma. It's very self-centered, I found, in a sense, whereas this is very much like, okay, there's more to life than me and dealing with my problems, my karma, purifying myself. Obviously, when you delve into Krishna consciousness, a lot of it is about self purification, but also at the heart of it, it's that service attitude that really grabbed my attention and curiosity, really.
mm, mm. That's really impressive. I mean, I've never heard anyone say that before. I don't think. I mean, I'm sure that's something that has appealed to people, but other people will say something like, other devotees will say something like, "Oh, it was the mantra, or
Mm,
it was the dress code, or it was the wonderful prasadam, or it was the kirtan." But the service attitude, I'm really intrigued by that. And I don't know a lot about Buddhism. I know a little bit to get me by. But in my head, because I'm from an academic background, in my head, the Buddhist religion was the one that kind of never really fitted into my kind of
mm.
perception of the world. But I'm intrigued by that, the service attitude of devotees. So in your time in Krishna consciousness, what services have you been involved with? What projects have you contributed towards?
So, like I said, I helped out with the outreach for Soho Street during lockdown, which was Bhakti Yoga London. And I just, stay, I've served at the manor, just, stay at the ladies' ashram, do some services there. I also used to co-host the Many Moons podcast, which was aimed at, getting other Vaishnavis, association of senior Vaishnavis, and also discussing particular issues that were pertinent to women, or, that affected Vaishnavis, and giving other Vaishnavis a platform to air whatever issues, things that they felt passionate about. And we were very privileged to have had a few proper disciples as well. So yeah, so done a bit of service. I just always think, I mean, there's no ideal service. If I can serve anywhere, I'm not precious about what particular service I do. Again, that it's a service attitude. I just, it's something that's always, attracted me to
Mm,
Krishna consciousness, and it's something that's always, whatever service is service to the Lord is pretty much my
mm.
attitude, really.
That kind of like humble approach where you don't want anything in return, or you're not in it for the results necessarily, in terms of you don't want anything for yourself. You want
Mm,
the Bhakti Yoga, Krishna Consciousness, is about serving the Lord, and serving the Lord entirely, devotionally,
yeah.
without wanting any results for yourself, no matter what it is. Yeah, yeah,
I mean, well, I
savor.
wouldn't plant myself as such elevated.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that at the root of it, I just, there's some people I'm just, obviously we need to take into account our nature, our
Mm,
vana, our dharma. So, in line, if I can find services that are in line with it and that I
mm,
resonate with, obviously, where so any service being needed, I'm not, I try and just do my bit. Doesn't matter where or to who. I'm not particular about,
mm,
that sort of thing. So,
mm,
and it's something that I also try and really take it to heart when it comes to work. It's about, because I find, as you get into leadership positions or managerial positions, it's a lot about, there's a lot of leaders we see that are they've got their personal agendas, they've got their, it's always good to have a view and a vision. But then I find where the service element is not there, they struggle to get along with people, they just don't create that community team spirit, which becomes very difficult. So I think I've learned a lot from Bhakti Yoga that I desperately, on a day-to-day basis, try and incorporate into a somewhat normal life that I try and lead.
Normal life that you try and lead. I like that. I also try to live a normal life as much as possible. When I joined the Hare Krishna movement, actually almost 20 years ago, originally, I really wanted to try to ensure that my family hadn't thought that I joined a cult. And I guess in my head, I went out of my way to ensure that my family didn't treat me any differently. And I didn't, when I say I didn't want them, I mean, my initiated name is Narada. And if they want to call me Narada, they can, but I kind of don't want them to. That sounds a bit hypocritical. My mother gave me the name Nathan, and that is the name she will always give me. And that's fantastic. And it's also a great name, So I wanted to appear as normal as possible. Because from my background, which is a very white working class background in Somerset, in a village where people just don't have gurus. It's not what people do. The term guru is a very alien term, and giving up meat and not drinking. My family, love playing drinking games at Christmas. And my stepdad, they don't watch this podcast, so I can say it. And my new sister-in-law, who's Australian, they love to eat meat. They absolutely love it, and they say they can't have a meal without meat. And so I'm from a different world, metaphorically. So I know what you mean in terms of trying to appear as normal. Can we talk a bit about the role of women?
And actually, on that
Yeah,
normal,
yeah.
people assume they might look at me and think, oh, you're Buddhist, grew up, so therefore you should be very similar to, the kind of principles or way of living would be very similar to, what a devotee might lead. But it's very, very different. It's not very different from yours, really. My family are non-devotees, and actually they're quite anti Hare Krishna. They were just like, my sister outright said, "You've now decided to, are you having an early midlife crisis and you've decided to join a cult," sort of thing. And the fact that I was a vegetarian because since about 10 years ago, because I gave up eating meat after university, because on principle, just environmental and ethical reasons, I've always wanted to do that. But then when I started, like you said, giving up drinking, and I come from a very all my friends, we read politics at university, and if anybody knows anybody that's worked in politics, public affairs, very pub culture, going to the pub, drinking all day, not all day, but the drinking and socializing in the pub is a big thing. So when I started rocking up saying, "Oh, I don't want to drink," they were just like, "Are you all right?" So I took a lot of, I think, no, I wouldn't want to say, oh, I took a lot of courage from me, but it took a lot of conviction to really, for me, to accept my identity. Because for me, I was grappling a lot of trying to accept things like creationism, which was taught to me as complete nonsense as a Buddhist, because it's all about karma and there was this no one person that created the world. So the idea of creationism was very alien. So we didn't believe in God. So that was in a sort of amongst people that I used to grow up with, went to university with friends that now they've all been like, oh, this is a bit hipster, whatever, doesn't eat meat, but not drinking and very difficult. And I think I have just about managed. It's taken me about 3 years really to kind of slowly, gradually establish myself so that frame myself in a way that's not alienating others, because ultimately these are friends that have stood by me for like over 10 years. I can't just click a finger and be like, now I'm a devotee, therefore you are all
Mm,
karmis and my family. You can't do that. I think people have to be a little bit practical. So I completely resonate with you in terms of how you try and be normal whilst living your life.
mm.
Can be very challenging. I've certainly found it quite challenging.
I mean, I'm intrigued that you mentioned about the kind of Buddhist upbringing. You mentioned meat eating and alcohol. In my naivety, I always thought Buddhists were vegetarian. But that's not necessarily the case, is it?
Technically, there's a lot of Buddhists, that go to the temple, whatever, they eat meat, drink. My family's always done it. My parents eat meat. There's very
Mm.
few, I think, Buddhists that I know of are vegetarian and don't drink.
Mm. Mm.
Although
It's
technically it's
more of a
five precepts.
nominal thing. It's a nominal, like in name only.
Yes.
I won't mention his name. I mean, some people, no, nobody will know. But one of my lecturers at university he is a Theravadan Buddhist monk. I think he might have retired now. So he worked for 20 years at the university. Great guy, actually. He moved from Sri Lanka to the city I studied in to lecture in Buddhism, and I think he did other stuff. And I went to an event with him once. And he was having fish and eggs, and I was just quite surprised. I kept looking at his plate, like, what's he eating? I thought he was vegetarian. So that kind of surprised me.
Yeah.
So can we talk a bit about the role of women in the Krishna Consciousness movement? You've talked about your involvement or your contribution to the Many Moons podcast,
Yeah, that's right.
um, and uh, championing the role of women, raising the profile of the role of women in the Krishna Consciousness movement. I kind of want to ask a rhetorical, obvious question, but it might sound a little bit. My question is, why is there a need to do that? I don't mean that from a male chauvinistic point of view at all, but why is there still a need to raise awareness of the role of women and the importance of women in the Krishna consciousness movement?
Because the truth is, really, I find still, I think it's a nature thing as well. There's more men would put themselves, and it's no different in the workplace either. Men would easily put themselves. There's research. Men would easily go for promotions and put themselves out for recognition, and women inherently have the tendency to not be as forthcoming as the male gender. So I think it was just about creating those equal opportunities and platforms for those that didn't have that opportunity. Because if you still look at the number of Vaishnavis giving class, morning class or the Sunday feast lectures, it's still very low in comparison to the Prabhus. So you'd have, well, when is it like there's a Vaishnavi gift? So it's just I think we just wanted to make sure that, because there are so many qualified great Vaishnavis out there that deserve to be heard more. So it was more as that, because I saw very quickly, that disparity is there. I think if anybody pretends to say there's all equal opportunities, equal, I'm not saying it's anybody's fault
Mm,
necessarily, because when we started doing the podcast, we had to really do a lot of persuading to get these great ladies to come on board. So it's that, like I said, that inherent, not putting themselves forward necessarily and easily and so forthrightly. So that's why we felt there was a need to give those ladies an opportunity, really, more than
mm,
anything else.
mm, mm. Do you also? I mean, I'm. You kind of mentioned the kind of material world, such a jargon term, isn't it? You mentioned about that there's an issue in the kind of in the workplace in terms of women not coming forward, but particularly in the community of ISKCON.
Mhm.
Is it largely because, or is one of the reasons because ISKCON as an organization is largely a kind of socially conservative type environment? Is that one of the reasons why still, even though it's Britain in the 21st century? Um,
I very much think so, because I know, there's certain culture, no. get. It happens in Christianity, Islam, and it's non-different in ISKCON. So there's very traditional conservative values that, from India, around quite the, which are very patriarchal societies, even to this day. So those things often I find gets emulated as if it's a ISKCON or a Vaishnava thing, when it's nothing to do with ISKCON or nothing to do with Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So I think I think we'd be lying to ourselves, or pretending it's not the case if I was to say no. I think there's a degree of that, but also a degree of, again, that nature by nature, ladies not being that forthcoming in an environment where it's very conservative.
Mm,
That could, I think that's probably what's led to the kind of behavior patterns we've seen.
mm, mm. And I mean, I've got so many questions to ask about this. I kind of don't know where to start first, really, in terms of how are women in ISKCON, in the Krishna consciousness movement, being supported? I mean, there's great podcasts like the one you've mentioned, but how, for example, at a temple at Bhaktivedanta Manor or Soho Street and others around the UK, and how are women being encouraged and supported?
I mean, I can't talk about specific temples or movements or how we are, and I just don't feel like, I have an authority to speak on it. But my personal experience is, I've always found, there's reading groups, and there are groups, it tends to be very much, locally people being supported. But I often find it's, they're not given the equal platform,
Mm,
which is not just an ISKCON thing, really. I went on a leadership course recently, part of work, L&D, whatever, and they mentioned people in minorities, women often end up in positions despite their ability and capability, doing things that are not seen or visible. So
mm,
I think that's the point we've got. Not that we've not got qualified Vaishnavis, or there aren't any support
mm,
circles existing within Vaishnavis, because there are reading groups, there are, like we try to do the podcast, and I'm sure that there are supportive people looking after each other. But I think that visibility is not there, probably for that cultural reasons or what have you. Again, I'm just making a general comment
mm,
from what I feel the issue is. So it's not reflective of, what's always happening in wider ISKCON at all. But I think that might be the thing, that the lack of visibility for some reason is one of the key problems I think we've got.
mm. And in terms of um, the role, women becoming gurus, or female gurus,
Vaishnavi Diksha gurus.
Vaishnava Diksha gurus. I mean, I've actually kind of lost track where we are in ISKCON with that. So, for a lot of reasons, to be honest, uh, officially now, women, Vaishnavis, can they become Diksha gurus in ISKCON? Have we passed that line yet?
I mean, we passed it, but then there's a memory. To be honest, I've lost track, because then they put a pause on it. So I don't know where the conversations have led to, and that's where Kalakanta Prabhu started the petition. So I've not researched into it recently, as to what the latest is. So I don't want to mislead the audience by saying ISKCON is now doing X, Y,
Mm,
Z. But I think it doesn't matter in terms of why I think that the problem is, why we having this conversation is what we should be asking
mm,
in the 21st century, where I think the issue is also a guru disciple relationship. I find, is, to me at least, it's a very sacred relationship, and I don't think if somebody's qualified, that should deter them, from being a guru, whether irrespective of their female or male. And also, it goes back to the point about, if we are trying to be a modern, inclusive movement that Prabhupada wanted us to be, Prabhupada particularly wanted us to be, he called it International Society for Krishna Consciousness, so with that internationality, we need to take, look at what the demographics are and the current society, and what almost the society wants us, in terms of, as a movement, so, and that's mainly equality. And know somebody, if they find a connection with a qualified Vaishnavi,
mm,
I just find it quite disheartening that they can't take that initiation from a qualified, we must iterate this, qualified Vaishnavi, just because they're not being allowed to give initiation because they're a woman. And that, I think, goes against the whole premise that we're not the body, we're the soul. But we say we're not the body, we're the soul, but spirit, souls, and the externals don't matter so much. But we, at the same time, we just essentially faff around these issues, all based on bodily conception. So I think it's about transcending gender and looking at people for who they are, really, isn't it? I think that's what we should be asking the question: why are we having this question? And in the terms of asking this
I
question.
think for me, I've just always been baffled by the conversation. Kind of a relatively liberal Western upbringing, where my main role model growing up was my mother. I'm from a single parent family, and the person after that was my grandmother. So I've always seen. I mean, a lot of people would have had that experience, and for me, it's just always been baffling when you find out that the baseline, the fundamental principle of Krishna consciousness is we're not the body, we're not really male or female or Sri Lankan or English or Jewish or Christian or Hindu or conservative or liberal. We're not really any of these things. They're temporary labels in this material world for a temporary period of time, and so I've just always been baffled by the objections of some, not all, as to therefore why women, qualified women, couldn't become gurus. If you look at the lineage, the family that we come from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, a number of women, many women, over the last 500 years have taken on that important role of a guru in that setting, in terms of initiation, in terms of giving guidance and advice, and in terms of taking people back to Godhead, because that's what this spiritual movement at least should be about. So I've just always been baffled why a woman couldn't give initiation. I'm not going to mention her name because she's very shy, but one of the people over the last 20 years that's been instrumental in my Krishna consciousness is a woman. And I've really appreciated her kind and caring nature and her kind of motherly or aunt-like role in my life. Actually, I haven't really ever had a male role model in the Krishna consciousness movement. Obviously, my Diksha guru in ISKCON is a man, because that's the way it turned out. So I always been baffled by it, and so I'm kind of I'm in the choir. You're preaching to the choir, as the metaphor would say, and I would love to see more women in positions of authority in many ways in the Hare Krishna movement, and it just kind of surprises me why we're still having this conversation in the year 2023.
And it's interesting when you said, women in positions of authority. So I'm not an authoritarian, or in a sense that, what we used to call, pardon my French, bra burning feminists. I'm not that category. I'm all about, I really don't, and also if it's quite disheartening sometimes where you see the opposition for these women to, becoming temple presidents, or women becoming Vaishnavi Diksha Guru, acting as Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus, coming from other women. It really, it doesn't it does there's nothing that disheartens me more, because there's some very conservative Matajis thinking, why should we do this? It's all about some women that wants to get their faces in front. But it's nothing about, I think Garuda Prabhu says, talks a lot about this, because if somebody's vana is of a certain nature, and if they feel, most importantly, the best way they can cultivate Krishna Prem and serve Krishna, their guru often is Prabhupada. We're talking about Prabhupada, the senior Vaishnavis that are Prabhupada disciples, is by becoming a Diksha Guru. I don't think we should be stopping that, because that is preventing somebody from serving to the best of their ability. And that's where my sort of I'm obviously in favor of Vaishnavi Diksha Guru, but I'm not about, oh, the others are a complete bunch of so and so's and this, us against them kind of. It's not political for me. I think it's about helping any man or woman, irrespective of their so-called bodily conception that we so despise, stand in the way of them being able to serve in the best ability is what really disheartens me, with the whole debate.
You used a term that I wrote down about 7-8 minutes ago that I absolutely love, and it was something like creating a modern inclusive Hare Krishna movement, or a modern inclusive movement. I love those two. They're like nice buzz terms, modern and inclusive. I'm absolutely in agreement with you, trying to ensure the Krishna Consciousness movement becomes modern and inclusive. I wouldn't say remains, because I don't think we're there yet. And I've thought a lot over the last week or two, for different reasons, about this term inclusive. What does it really mean? Because there's a chance that you and I might disagree with things, or on certain issues, philosophically, theologically, on different things going on in politics and society. And, we're allowed to disagree. We live in a society where you're allowed to have your own opinion. It's a democracy in many ways. So that's, and I think that's healthy to have that kind of difference of opinion and debate. But it also means that we're not going to agree on lots of things. There's a conference, is a bit of a posh term. I think there's an online conference happening this weekend about progressive Vaishnavism.
Yes.
Which is really, really good. And for a long time, I certainly used the term progressive to describe myself. But I'm kind of I'm not having second thoughts, but I'm trying to rethink what that means. And actually, instead of using the word progressive, I want to use the term inclusive, because I also want the people that are more conservative to also be included. Progressive might mean something else, but actually for me, inclusive Vaishnavism, that's another buzz term, is even more appropriate in the way I think, me, little old layman me, think the Hare Krishna movement should operate. So I'm trying to think of an example. There was an okay, I'll tell you what the example is. I'm coming off the fence again now, okay? I don't agree with Nigel Farage on anything, okay? He's pro tree planting, which most people are. I mean, who doesn't support planting trees? And a couple of years ago, it was around the whole European Parliament campaign, and one of the candidates for the party that he was in was Anne Widdecombe, who was very Catholic,
Very
quite
conservative, yes.
very conservative, and she made some inappropriate comments about LGBT rights, LGBT marches. And then Nigel Farage came on TV the next day, and I thought, oh, got to get out of this one. You've got. He was gonna, and he said something that really stuck with me. And he said he didn't give his view on LGBT rights or issues, but he said freedom of expression is a two-way street, in the sense that absolutely in our society people can protest, march, have their say, but also you have to allow the people to say they disagree with that. And I'd never really thought of it that way before. So of me, I mean, I would define myself as a liberal, as inclusive. If I want to have my say in the Hare Krishna movement, I have to allow the people that disagree with me to have their say as well. Otherwise, I am, a hypocrite. And so where am I going with that little kind of sermon? I'm really developing this concept of inclusive Vaishnavism, and how we implement that in the modern Hare Krishna movement.
And I think if you forget all the buzzwords about inclusivity, dynamic, modern, all this jazz, it's at the heart of it. What I do on a regular basis, creating things that are supposed to serve the population of England, or, with a customer in mind. So we need to understand we are, I'm not talking about diluting any of the principles, going, changing things, parts. It's not about, picking XYZ to suit the needs. That's absolutely not what we should be doing, but also looking at what ways can we present Krishna consciousness in a way that is relevant to the society that we live in. And that was at the heart of Prabhupada's movement. When he came into the US, he wasn't dictating everybody become Brahmanas straight away. He was so merciful in accepting all these meaty tasks partying, drug taking, drinking hippies, and he gradually took them on a journey, with him. So that's what I think. I mean, I know a lot of, temples and groups that are trying to do, kind of tailor the preaching to the Western audience, and there's a lot of good initiatives out there, and so we shouldn't, take it away from them. But I think as a whole, we need to be a little bit more. I don't want to treat it as a transaction,
Mm,
customer focus, but really understand the audience. And that's where, when Kalakanta Prabhu took that, petition around the Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus, what he said was the audience that he is serving and connecting in the US is vastly different from the one that is in India, for instance, where they still have a very patriarchal society, where they don't have a problem with male only Diksha Gurus, whereas for Western, modern, liberal Western women, that are spiritually inclined, quite tend to be quite on the liberal side. So for
mm,
them, they might, like you said, connect with a female more, and then, they look at, oh, but this senior qualified Vaishnavi that I've connected with, I've got that sort of a shiksha guru, like guru disciple
mm,
relationship with. I cannot take initiation because they are female, and they're not allowed to give initiation. So I think that's where I'm not saying there should even be a blanket. I think that was the premise of the whole petition as well. We shouldn't be dictating just rules and regulations. That this is it. Everybody should follow XYZ irrespective of where the which communities they serve. But I think we need to be cognizant of our communities, our devotees, where we're based, and the way we are trying to serve those communities and devotees. Is that the best way we can? Is that the most inclusive way? And at the heart of it is also Deshakala Patra, time, place, circumstance, right? So it's looking at how we can be more time, place, circumstance, really, is, I think, the issue
mm,
we've
mm.
got to sort of deal with or grapple with.
Prabhupada talked a lot about ensuring that each temple, to some extent, was autonomous, and that they served their local community. So what's appropriate in New Delhi might not be appropriate in Edinburgh or in Yorkshire or in London. I just happen to have a verse from Bhagavatam. I didn't particularly prepare it for this podcast, but I'm giving a talk soon on this particular issue, and I just want to very briefly read the words of Prabhupada actually on this issue. So, firstly, the verse is Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 8, verse 54, and it says, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This is the 12-syllable mantra for worshipping Lord Krishna. One should install the physical forms of the Lord, and with the chanting of the mantra, one should offer flowers and fruits and other varieties of foodstuffs, exactly according to the rules and regulations prescribed by authorities. Then the verse says, but this should be done in consideration of place, time, and attendant conveniences and inconveniences. And then there's a very long purport or commentary by Srila Prabhupada on this particular verse. But just to highlight two things that really kind of resonated with me, Prabhupada says, the method of worship, which is chanting the mantra and preparing the forms of the Lord, is not stereotyped, nor is it exactly the same everywhere. It is specifically mentioned in this verse that one should take consideration of the time, the place, and the available conveniences. And then finally, Prabhupada continues, one has to consider the particular time, country, and conveniences. What is convenient in India may not be convenient in the Western countries. That is Prabhupada himself saying that.
Yeah, I mean, what to say. It's just it's written there, isn't it? It's
Hmm.
just about being cognizant of time, place, and circumstance. And I think there's no point getting into a east against the west, or we are the best. I think this is where the kind of whole debate becomes very toxic, and to an extent has got very toxic, because people on both sides have very strong opinions. And I think it's just somebody somewhere needs to kind of almost try and facilitate maybe a joint forum to bring these groups together, like
Mhm.
you said, to be more, have more open, inclusive dialogues around various topics that nobody wants to discuss, but they're there, they're not going to go away, and they're not going to go, it's only going to become a more pertinent issue or a problem as years would go by. So I think sooner people come together and discuss in a sort of respectful manner,
Mm.
whilst genuinely with a genuine listening and hearing attitude, the sooner the better, really. Yeah, because I think it's become somewhat toxic. And I also don't agree with branding. I know some people are naturally quite conservative, some people are quite liberal. That doesn't make the liberals better off than the conservatives, or nobody's superior based on whether they're on the more conservative side or liberal side. And we need to genuinely promote respect amongst each other, but it's just doing it in a positive, constructive way, I think, is what we are struggling with. And we're not the only people. I mean, the Church of England's having this whole issue, Catholic Church has this issue. I think we're just not the only ones where it's just a difficult balance, I think, to achieve as well.
Mm. Mm. I agree. And if you look at religions generally, which traditionally and historically have been very patriarchal in terms of men having the positions of leadership, whereas in the outside world, the world's becoming much more inclusive. Women are having, quite rightly, much more senior roles and prominent roles and influential roles in society. Each religion or religions have to try and strike that balance of their, in being in touch with their tradition, but also embracing modernity to attract new people. Uh, you know, particularly missionary movements like the Hare Krishnas. I would say the Jehovah's Witnesses as well. Um, so yeah, I would agree with you on that. Okay. What else do you particularly want to touch on? I mean, I'm amazed that we've gone over so much in the last 45 minutes. It's quite phenomenal, actually. And I've been really quite encouraged by some of the things that you've been saying around the role of women in the Krishna consciousness movement, and kind of striking that balance between conservatives and liberals as well, and being much more kind of respectful towards each other. How then, let's change tact a little bit. How do you think we can attract more people? I might know the answer to this already. How do you think we can attract more people to Krishna consciousness?
I think first and foremost, let them be who they are and understand and be cognizant of their journey. Because what I've seen is also sometimes you get so caught up in the rules, the regulations,
Mm.
and doesn't really help, like, allow somebody to flourish and kind of go on that spiritual journey. Because when I joined the movement, with all good intentions, this is the thing, no bad intentions, but unintended consequences. Some devotees used to tell me, oh, no, 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 you need to start. One person actually said to me, to somebody who's completely alien to Krishna consciousness, who's never chanted before, who's just about chanting, oh, no, no, I think you should start with 4 rounds, like try and do 4 rounds regularly, as to somebody that's never chanted before, and then these
Mm.
things about no onion, garlic, no caffeine. I'm not saying let's just ditch it all, make it a free for all, get rid of these, because these principles are there for a reason, to help us regulate ourselves. And next will be like, oh, get rid of the 4 regulative principles, nobody has to chant. I'm not saying make it a free for all, you pick, you choose. But I think the way in which we introduce Krishna consciousness to people is, we need to be cognizant. I think there's a lot of devotee care initiative being done by the former Somerset president Janita Prabhu and his wife Bhakti Mataji, and they've been traveling around. I've seen doing a lot of, I think that devotee care element and taking people on a journey is very important. And it's something that we often, I think, neglect, because I think it's one of the things that my Guru Maharaj mentioned as well, we're very good at attracting people. So there's hundreds of, initiatives. We do kirtan, we distribute prasadam, we tell them to come to the temple, but actually taking those people that take an initial interest in Krishna consciousness and cultivating through the different stages is as important, or if not more important, in retaining them than just go, let's attract, let's attract, let's attract. I think the way we do that, I think the best way we can attract people, it's just not just necessarily attracting. What do we do next once we've sparked that initial flame of enthusiasm or
Mm.
interest? I think is more important. And make and let people, just don't be draconian, and let's just give people the time to adapt and go on their own journey. Because I've seen some people saying, okay, like, even if somebody's aspiring, you need to, like, ideally, like, let's just have a timeline. Well, there's no timeline to it, really. I mean, I'm not saying just aimlessly meander and not make progress, but as long as you're making progress, and it's not going to be a linear upward trajectory, but it'll be
Mm.
ups and downs. But as long as you're still sort of going a little bit towards the up, it's in any way. It could be your chanting, it could be your, other services. As long as you're making improvements in some ways, I think, we should really be nurturing people. And I'm very, very lucky, actually, and very fortunate, that even my mentors, they're very, sincere and very kind, really, and so accommodating to a charlatan like me, who's just struggling to, be consistent in things. And they're just like, you're trying, and the most important thing is keep trying. Nobody's perfectionist. You'd get there in your own time, but encourage people to try. Because I've seen some people, particularly when I did outreach, they become very enthusiastic. They
Mm.
go all guns blazing. You see them at the temple every day, and then 2 months later they're burnt out and they've left. Because, or they try and become, go from Kanishta to Uttama in like 3 months. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's just, we need to be very careful, and I think we need to pay a lot of attention the way to kind of reach out more. And make Krishna consciousness attractive should be that retention, really looking at what can we do to help that person in their spiritual growth. And I'm not saying it's not happening, but I think more could be done to, if you're to expand and move as a movement. I think that retention is just as important, and is something that doesn't get spoken of enough, than attracting. Because it's all about attracting. Let's just go distribute books, meet new people, meet new people. But what happens once you've met that person? I think that's something we need to get better at.
Mm. Mm. I know of a number, or I have met a number of people over the years that they get involved. They put a dhoti on, they shave up, they chant 16 rounds a day. I remember meeting one devotee. He joined the program I was on a couple of years ago, many years ago actually. And at that point, I wasn't chanting 16 rounds a day. I um, I moved towards the number 16 over a number of
Mm.
years, because I knew if I started straight away, I would just bounce back. And he joined the program we were on, and I had never met him before in my life, and he was chanting 16 rounds a day. And I was like, wow, you're very and I remember he became very militant as well about like food stuff, like and I remember him shouting at me one day about one particular issue. It wasn't eating meat, fish, or eggs. I wasn't doing any of that, but
Yeah.
he was just very militant about a particular issue. And I remember I became concerned about him, and then 6 months later, he just kind of disappeared. I mean, he hasn't disappeared. He just left the movement because he threw himself in. He found out that he couldn't swim, if you use that metaphor, and it was just too much for him. He couldn't cope with completely changing his life. Yeah, so I've seen a number of people like that. So I'm really pleased to hear that there are some things going on, not a lot, but some things going on about retention. There needs to be more retention. You often hear stories about, you know, and I talk, quite a few devotees contact me because of I don't know, I think because of this podcast, and I've probably become a bit outspoken on a number of issues, but people contact me just asking for advice, and they tell me stories about how, you know, uh, people at the temple are so keen to get them in, you know, to get them to chant the Hare Krishna mantra, which is great, you know, to behave in a certain way, do certain things. But after a while, they kind of don't talk too much anymore, or they don't want to know you so much anymore. You know, once you're seen as part of the club, that pastoral care, bit of a Christian term there, that pastoral care kind of goes out of the window. So we need to be better at just caring for one another and being nice to one another. Just be nice, asking how somebody is. You know, yeah, that's kind of my view on that, I'd
Yeah,
say.
I think you're right, and it's the thing, and I think it's very difficult as well, when the congregations grow, and so there are initiatives out there, and at least I know two people that are trying very hard to establish that. But I think there needs to be more focus on that, because like you said, it's just people generally being nice to each other, because if not, you get people you've cultivated join in, and they go through struggles. But also, I think it's not just as a movement, that the individuals should also take responsibility for their journey. It's a two-way street. We can't expect temples or temple presidents or authorities to, there is a responsibility towards the community, of course, but people also need to seek, use initiative to seek your own tribe, or seek opportunities, because there are people willing to help out there. So I encourage people who are feeling like, oh, nobody wants to talk to me anymore, maybe then talk to some people you've not spoken to before. So I think that's important, people and also, if there's nothing in your community now, I know somebody that felt, oh, there's not enough reading. I know so many people have just started sanghas, reading groups. I'm part of some, because, oh, I want to read the Bhagavatam, I want to read the Nectar of Devotion, or I want to read the Gita, but I'll just like invite a few people along. Let's create a reading group. So I wouldn't, I would encourage them, if you've got the capacity, obviously with qualified people. You just you can't have just people just randomly doing things and preaching wrong things. Always ensure there's somebody qualified there to instruct take you through that self learning journey, take you through that learning journey. But don't feel afraid to start something up. Most initiatives started, Prabhupada saw there wasn't anything in the West. He started it. He didn't moan about it, that there was nothing in the West, or, he wasn't being supported. He just got there and got on with it and did it, you know? So often in life, you should also just not rely too much. You see a lot of this is not happening in the temple, my temple is doing it. Well, okay, Prabhu or Mataji, just do it. And that's what we did, with the Many Moons podcast. We felt that actually there's not a lot of ladies, or there's lots of Vaishnavis, senior Vaishnavis out there that we would love to hear more from, rather than moaning about, oh, there isn't existing platforms. We just tried to create a platform. So I think a lot of it, I think devotees also need to be a little bit more like, okay, if there's no opportunities, the saying goes, we need to be the change we want to see. So if you want to see a change, why not? You don't have to start big, but start little, start grassroots levels, which is what your Hare Krishnas in the UK like encourage, isn't it? Little grassroots movement. Just start it little. Who knows where it'll go.
We're very keen to encourage devotees and non-devotees to try and make a difference.
Yeah.
So I completely agree. I probably much agree with mostly everything you've said actually today. You've been a wonderful guest to talk
Oh,
with,
thank you.
because I've been very your enthusiasm is very infectious, and I can kind of feel it coming through the kind of internet signal. It's been very encouraging, and I'd love to hear what you and others are doing in the kind of Krishna consciousness movement to try to make it more modern and inclusive. Because I think the number of people in Great Britain, I worked it out once, the number of people in Great Britain actually practicing Krishna consciousness or Gaudiya Vaishnavism is about 0.002%.
Oh,
It's
wow.
a very small number of people. So we can be proud about that a little bit, but there's so much work to be done, and we should never rest on our laurels. And most of those 68 million people will not join a movement if they think they have to wear bizarre clothes or they have to behave in a certain way or just give everything up. The Krishna, the regulated principles were once described to me in this way. It's like think of somebody who wants to be an Olympic champion. Their goal and their focus is that they want to be an Olympic champion. Now, there's things they have to do on the way to become an Olympic champion. They need to get up early. They need to have a very strict diet. They need to eat well, probably lay off the booze for a while. They need to be really healthy, very disciplined, lots of physical pain. You're building those muscles, but they don't focus on the physical pain or the diet or the regulation. They focus on being the Olympic champion. And that's the same in Krishna consciousness. Our focus should be on serving Lord Krishna, on serving the Lord, on Bhakti Yoga. How we achieve that or work towards that is kind of secondary. These other things that we do are there to help and encourage and facilitate. We know that eating meat isn't good for our Krishna consciousness, for our Bhakti Yoga. It's not, the goal isn't to give up eating meat. That's just part of the journey to give up eating meat. So that was once how the regulated principles, that sounds very religious, doesn't it? The regulated principles. That's how they were once described to me.
And also, we need to be quite cognizant of how we portray ourselves, because for people like me, and this whole kami versus devotee thing, it's just, well, if I had to disown kamis and only associate Vaishnavas, I'd literally just have to live in the temple because I work full of which is the practical daily life of pretty much everybody living in the material world, right? And some people are very, very fortunate to be in communities where there's lots of devotees or live by a lot of devotees, and also whose families are devotees or very receptive of devotees. And there's a lot of us, but some of us, maybe not a lot, some of us, like myself, certainly, I find myself everywhere I go a minority every way, shape, or form. So when I go to work, my current workplace is very white, very male, very middle class. So I'm not only a minority, I'm also this supposed no meat eating, no eggs, no fish, no drinking. So how do I kind of portray myself? I don't walk around saying I'm a Hare Krishna. These are the regulative principles. I'm sure there's not everybody. I'm sure most people have common sense and wouldn't go out doing that. But it's how we kind of dovetail our identity, being like a global citizen whilst being a devotee, is very important, because we can't afford to be very insular and be out of touch with the modern society, or how the other half lives. Because if we are a preaching outward movement, we need, the best way to convert them is by getting out there, being part of it, and then gradually showing them actually this lifestyle. So I often tell my colleagues, they always ask, oh, why are you not drinking? Are you religious reasons? I said, yes, religious reasons, but also, I'm drunk, yeah, I've had all the alcohol, or, I need it, I don't miss it anymore. These are the negatives I found, like for my consciousness, which I'm not saying anything that's different to what's in the Shastras, but rather than making a big deal of big song, sing song and a dance, I don't drink, therefore I stand superior in the moral high ground stakes. So I think we need to get off that high horse a little bit and try and look carefully at how we portray ourselves. Even I wouldn't, if I were to criticize all meat eating people, then I'd be criticizing all my family, and I wouldn't have anything else to do rather than criticizing. But I say, look, they're also living human beings, and not human living beings, and in a day where we've got so much choice, I don't feel the need to eat meat. If you eat, your choice ultimately, because there's certain people that will never change, right? So I think we just need to be very careful and about turning up too preachy, because what we then risk doing is undermining or not not undermining it, not being able to share that Sanatan Dharma, which we have, is superior to everything from people, because they'll be put off because these bunch are very judgy, sitting on the moral high chair sort of folk. So I think we need to be very careful of how you portray. So I always say, like, if I'm going to live in a temple and serve or whatever, I'll just say, oh, I'm going on a yoga retreat, because it's yoga in the end, right? It's bhakti yoga. I'm not hiding, I'm not lying.
Mm,
It's the highest form of yoga. So I openly did say, oh, I went to live in a temple the other, like I served a couple of months ago. And I said, oh, I'm off, guys. I'll see you in a week. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm going to live in a temple just because I just want to switch off from the world and, improve my daily meditation practice. And you'd be surprised how keen people become. They just feel like, oh, really? So do you meditate daily? Oh, really? Like, what's it all about? And I've had a few colleagues, have conversations around it. So it's just being cognizant of how you present your devotional life, particularly to others, not lying or hiding. I never hide my identity.
mm, mm,
I wear my beads, like if people ask me, what is it you wear every day, I'll happily explain. But it's
mm.
just finding a way that you kind of integrate into the society rather than being this sort of insular bunch looking out into the society. I think that's the risk. And that for outward reaching movement, I think that is creating a rod for our own backs, if I'm being honest.
And I appreciate your honesty. I think a lot of people listening to this and watching this will agree with you 100 and 108%, 110%. Um, we are, Krishna exists in the hearts of all. Krishna lives in all living entity. He exists in all living entities. And so my family, I'm the only vegetarian in my family. My family all eat meat. I have no particular desire to change them or tell them that because I've changed my life, they have to change theirs. I made a decision about my life and the way I want to live. They
Yeah.
should therefore have the freedom to live their life in the way that they want to live. Sometimes we talk about things on a more philosophical level and animals, and things come up because we watch it on the news together and we have a conversation
Mm.
about it. My stepfather, who loves eating meat, many years ago, he didn't really want to talk about vegetarianism or veganism, but now we can at least have a conversation about it.
Mm.
We went to my brother's wedding recently in Nice in France, and France is terrible for alternative diets. And I remember having a conversation. My stepfather was very concerned that there wasn't a lot for me to eat. And eventually I managed to get hold of something, but he was quite concerned about that. Whereas the 10 years ago, he probably wouldn't have bothered that much. So over time, people can change in terms of their perception of you, in terms of how they treat you. I respect them still. They're still my family, and I don't want them to treat me in any different way. um
And that's the thing, it's a time thing, it's changing hearts and minds over years, because
mm,
they still to a degree mock me for what I do, as in my family. But I remember very vividly having a conversation with a family member when I was staying at theirs, and they said, oh Dee, whatever you do. So they saw me chanting and they were just like, ha ha ha, what is this? You take this beat, you say the same thing, is this not boring? Why do you have to do it for so many hours? Or like saying it once, is it not enough? All these questions, which is fine. And I used to get really disappointed, used to have, arguments trying to justify my sort of living. But then I thought, what, I'm just, like you said, I'm not going to change my life because of you, and surely, slowly but surely, they'll kind of understand. But then they said, oh, whatever you're doing, keep doing, because I find you less, clearly whatever this is working, for you at least, because I find you less confrontational, or you don't get worked up as half as you used to get worked. So so they're much more sort of, not, I wouldn't say they'd ever be happy about it, but they've now accepted this is who I am.
mm,
Even when I go home, my mum's like, oh, okay, you don't eat fish, meat, oh, onion, garlic. They're just a bit like, okay, should I do this? They're a little bit more cooperative, whereas 3 4 years ago, when I was also a bit like, not militant, no, you guys eat meat, I don't want to eat meat, I never ate meat. But even things like eggs, fish, like, very very strict. And that I found was more counterproductive. People get very defensive. So the more you try and justify and try and make a big deal of it,
Mm,
people get more defensive. So let people observe the change in you, or let them see that you're actually committed to this, and slowly but surely they'll understand, and at least have that understanding.
mm, mm. I agree. I mean, my mum's wonderful. She uh, knows I don't eat meat, fish, or eggs, and the onion and garlic thing. When I first told her about that, she thought it was just silly. It was in my head. What's wrong with onion and garlic? Yes, onion and garlic, lovely, great flavoring for different foods and things. And I never asked her to not prepare anything with onion and garlic because I didn't want her to go out of her way for me. But somebody told her, "Oh, the Hare Krishnas don't eat onion and garlic." And ever since then, she always, like at Christmas when I go and visit, she'll make me a dish with no meat, fish, or eggs, onion, or garlic from scratch. She'll cook it in a separate tray, use separate utensils. And I have never asked her to do that. And I feel really quite touched and moved by that. That's, I guess, her way of showing love and support for me. It's like, I don't know, if somebody's got a young son, and they want to go and join a football team, they'll go and watch the football match to support their son, even if they don't like football. Well, I don't like football either, but that's my mum's way of supporting me
Yeah.
by, she might think it's all a bit weird and that God isn't a blue boy with a flute, but she support a teenage boy with a girlfriend. Has God got a girlfriend? Yes. She might think it's a bit weird, but she supports me because I'm her son.
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
Dee, it's been wonderful to chat with you. We've actually talked about quite a lot in about an hour, 15 minutes or so. It's been phenomenal. And I I've loved your kind of honest approach to Krishna consciousness. I think most people probably would agree with you on so many issues. It's just about having the opportunities to spread Krishna consciousness in those realistic ways. That sounds like jargon, but people are nervous to talk about Krishna consciousness at work. People are nervous to wear their beads in public. People are nervous to chant around others, or to explain why they're taking Jamashtami off of work. People are nervous about those things. So I think your story and your confidence is actually really inspiring and encouraging to others.
And also, it's worth saying, I'm not authority on anything. I've just literally shared my mere, very short couple of, like 3, 4, I don't know, I lose count because I never count these years in Krishna consciousness. But I think it's just a lot of it is to do with you deciding who you are and your identity. It took me a
Mm,
lot of years, like I said, touched upon very briefly, being a Buddhist. A lot of these concepts were alien. So I was a lot, maybe spent like a year and a half, even 2 years, one foot here, one foot there. So it's just a lot of, you knowing your identity, your nature, and then looking at, okay, how best can you so for me personally, how I believe is, whatever skills that Krishna has given me, the skills I should use in some way, shape, or form as way of service. So if I ever get the opportunity to serve, that's in line with my nature as much as possible, where I can use the skills I use at work in a service context, I try my best to do that. So it's just understanding your limitations and your strengths and your weaknesses, and try and utilize that in Krishna consciousness. And I just also want to encourage people. Some people think, oh, I work in a specific sector which is not very Krishna conscious, only I'm not a yoga teacher or whatever, in corporate environments it's very difficult. Well, I also work in a very political environment, worked in political environments, and I wasn't a devotee back then, but I still work with all those people. So it's just the way in which how you navigate it, and let not anybody dictate how you practice Krishna consciousness, because it's your journey. Your relationship with Krishna and your relationship with your guru is sacred and precious and individualistic. So like with my very little experience, or from what I've seen, is you need to, as long as you make it, it's your journey and you
mm,
tailor it to your time, place, circumstance, I think it becomes a lot more manageable. Whereas if you try and live other people's, so and so is doing this, so and so is doing that, they joined the same time as me, therefore now I should be initiated, aspiring for like second initiation. I think that's where the problems are. People trying to be a Madhyama Uttama when they're Kanishta or not. I class myself not even a Kanishta, and I accept that. So that's made my life very easy, because I know it'll take me God knows how long to, if I go down initiation. I'm aspiring, but I don't know. I don't want to put timelines, because I understand, I'm a fallen soul, and I've got a long, long way to go, and I accepted that, and that's made my life a lot easier. So don't create unnecessary barriers based on other people's journeys or other people's experiences
Mm,
for yourself, and just create a rod for your own back, really, is what I've,
mm.
like to share, to be
Thank you.
honest.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate you sharing this week. On episode 69 of the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. I was surprised when we got to episode 10, but we've made it to episode 69, which is quite an achievement. And we've interviewed some really interesting people over the last 2 years. So thank you for sharing your story this week, and your words of wisdom and your wise words. And um yeah, so I think we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to say goodbye to our wonderful audience at home. So a big thank you to Dee for being our guest on this week's edition of the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. This was episode number 69. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, please do put a positive comment. Please do share the links with your friends and your family if you feel comfortable to, and also on whatever pages or networks or community groups on Facebook, on whatever social media platform you use, because we want to share people's stories. The Hare Krishna in Britain podcast is about sharing stories and having some honest conversations about what's happening or what we'd like to happen in the kind of Hare Krishna world, if that makes sense. So until next week, we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Hare
Thank you.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.